She shouldn't have cared. By every law of the wild, her powerful claws and crushing jaws were meant for one thing: the quick, brutal end of the fragile creature before her. But the lioness named Kamunyak, which means the Blessed One, did the unthinkable. She nudged the tiny orphaned oryx calf with a snout built for tearing flesh, not gentle comfort. This was a paradox sculpted in dust and blood, a predator choosing protection over instinct, life over lunch. Her bond with the first of many was an anomaly so profound it shook the very foundations of the food chain, proving that sometimes, even in the harshest wilderness, a different kind of hunger prevails. It was the sound of a heart overriding the roar of nature's oldest command. The stage for this impossible drama was the Samburu National Reserve in northern Kenya, a vast, sun-scorched expanse of acacia woodlands and dry riverbeds. It is a land of relentless heat and sudden brutal storms, where survival is not a given but a daily earned privilege. Here, the rule of predator and prey is simple, immutable, and written in claw marks on the dusty earth. The oryx, with their magnificent straight horns and striking facial markings, are high on the menu. They are fast, but they are also vulnerable, especially the young. This is Kamunyak's world, a lioness in her prime, powerful and solitary. She wasn't an outcast. She was simply a lioness who preferred her own company, a fact that perhaps allowed her the mental distance from her pride's established and entirely carnivorous norms. Her solitary nature set her apart, but it was the first calf that truly sealed her legendary status. The calf was days old, likely separated from its mother during a scramble for the sparse watering holes. It was weak, disoriented, and a beacon for every scavenger and hunter within miles. Lions, like all great predators, are acutely attuned to weakness. The sight of an abandoned infant prey should have triggered a purely predatory response: a quick hunt, a meal, and a return to the shade. But what happened next defied the textbook of ecology. Kamunyak didn't pounce. She stood guard. For days, observers, including the Samburu warriors and the local conservationists, watched from a distance, baffled. They expected the inevitable. They waited for the moment when instinct would finally assert itself and the natural order would be violently restored. Yet, with every sunrise, they found Kamunyak shielding the calf with her massive body, driving away jackals and, most astonishingly, other lions. She would let the calf nuzzle her, and when it cried, she would respond not with a roar, but with a low, rumbling sound that seemed more maternal than menacing. The heat of the Samburu baked this bizarre partnership into the dry ground. This single act of non-predation in a landscape defined by it became the central mystery of the reserve. The calf, dependent and trusting, seemed completely unaware of the threat she represented. The relationship was fragile, a whisper against the constant noise of the wild. Kamunyak, the predator, had to constantly manage two conflicting priorities: her need to hunt and feed herself, and her need to protect her adopted charge. She could not kill nearby, for the scent of fresh blood would certainly draw scavengers, and potentially her own kind. So she hunted far away, making long, exhausting treks under the brutal Kenyan sun, often returning empty-bellied, but driven by a force that transcended simple appetite. She would leave the calf hidden, concealed in the low scrub, trusting in camouflage, and the sheer unlikelihood of its protector being a lion. The first test of this extraordinary arrangement came quickly in the form of a hungry male lion, a nomad passing through the territory. The male saw an easy meal, an abandoned calf, an opportunistic kill. He moved in swiftly, but before he could reach the whimpering oryx, a wall of sinew and gold stood in his path, Kamunyak launched herself not in an attack to kill, but in a furious, defensive display. She roared, a sound of pure maternal rejection of the threat, batting the intruder away with powerful, measured swipes. It was a display of controlled aggression, enough to repel a rival, but carefully calibrated so as not to harm the tiny life cowering behind her. The male, confused and unwilling to engage in a meaningless fight over such meager prey, retreated. The natural order had bent, but it hadn't broken. Kamunyak had chosen her path, and she would enforce it against all comers, even her own species. The ordeal with the male lion was only the beginning. The Samburu's harshness demanded vigilance, not just from threats, but from the sheer logistical impossibility of the relationship. Kamunyak, driven by this inexplicable maternal imperative, found herself caught in a perpetual loop of hunger and guardianship. She was physically a lioness, but emotionally she had become a nursemaid, perpetually worried about the tiny, fragile life that trotted awkwardly at her flank. The calf, emboldened by her presence, began to feed normally when they were near grazing patches, always staying within the shadow of her great form. This was the only way it could survive, drawing strength and sustenance from the very ground it shared with its sworn enemy. The bond deepened through repetition and simple proximity. When Kamunyak rested, the calf rested alongside her, often pressing against her warm, muscled flank. It was a picture of impossible serenity, the sharp, predatory eyes of the lioness scanning the horizon, not for prey, but for danger to the small life nestled in her protection. The observers noted a change in Kamunyak's posture, a subtle softening of her features, a patience not typically afforded to anything outside of a mother's own cubs. She would lick the calf, a rough, powerful tongue applying a gentleness it was never evolved to possess, as she was teaching it in the most primal, nonverbal way that it was safe. This routine repeated, not just with the first calf, but with 5 subsequent orphaned oryx calves over the course of the following year. As each adopted calf inevitably grew stronger and wandered back to its own herd, or was regrettably taken by a threat Kamunyak couldn't ward off, she would eventually reappear with a new one. It was a cycle of loss and renewal, demonstrating a persistent, powerful, and deeply ingrained maternal need that transcended species boundaries. Each new calf represented a fresh commitment to an unnatural way of being. For the first few days of each adoption, the fear in the calf's eyes was palpable. Then, slowly, trust would bloom under the constant, overwhelming security of the lioness's shadow. She never ate them. She never attempted to harm them. She simply protected them, living on far-flung, risky hunts. The human mind struggled to categorize this behavior. It wasn't symbiosis. It was pure, paradoxical nurture, a biological error in the system that created a moment of profound, cross-species love. This commitment to the vulnerable, repeated 6 times, was her true identity, carved not in her genetics, but in her choices. The most intense challenges to Kamunyak's impossible bond came not from the casual cruelty of the environment, but from the calculated, collective threat of other predators and the very people who sought to observe her. The hyenas, for instance, are the opportunists of the bush, highly intelligent and relentless. They recognize the oryx calf as an isolated weakness, a potential meal guarded only by a single lioness whose intentions seemed suspiciously soft. A pack of 5 hyenas, their low, unsettling whoops echoing across the scrubland, once cornered Kamunyak and her current charge near a dry riverbed. This was not a quick ambush. It was a slow, deliberate siege designed to wear down the defender's will and exploit the biological absurdity of her position. Kamunyak was forced into a dance of defense. She couldn't charge and kill the hyenas because any momentary lapse in her defense would allow the others to snap up the calf. Instead, she performed a masterful series of feints and lunges, using her size and sheer menace to keep the pack at bay. She was fighting 5 battles at once, maintaining a secure perimeter, conserving her energy, and dealing with the gnawing hunger that her limited hunting schedule imposed. The hyenas would scatter only to regroup moments later, their eyes fixed on the small, trembling calf tucked beneath her belly. She fought with a restraint that was utterly alien to her species, a commitment to non-lethal force that was more taxing than any actual hunt. The human element also added to the pressure. The conservationists and local guides were divided. Some saw her as a miracle, a testament to the unexpected power of maternal instinct. Others saw her as a problem, a lioness whose bizarre behavior could disrupt scientific understanding of predator-prey dynamics and potentially lead to her own starvation. The need to observe her and document her unique life meant a near-constant, though distant, human presence, adding another layer of stress to the already tense situation. There were times when the calf was taken, either by a swift, unseen predator or when it simply strayed too far during Kamunyak's necessary long-distance hunts. In these moments, the observers noted a genuine, agonizing distress in the lioness, a low, mournful calling that seemed to echo her failure to protect the sacred trust she had taken on. She would search for days, her commitment to the lost calf overriding her immediate survival needs. Yet eventually she would return, and in the strange poetry of the Samburu, the cycle would begin anew with a different solitary oryx, demanding her impossible love. She was perpetually tested, and with every defense of her fragile charge, she proved that instinct is not a single, unchangeable command, but a complex, deeply personal choice. The emotional crest of Kamunyak's story came during her final documented protection. The last calf she adopted was particularly frail. The rains had been poor, and the environment was more unforgiving than usual. Kamunyak herself was visibly thinner, the relentless stress of providing for 2 lives while only feeding 1 had taken its toll. She carried the weight of 6 impossible commitments on her shoulders, and the strain was palpable. One dry afternoon, they were stalked by a rival pride, 3 healthy lionesses who saw Kamunyak's strange attachment not as a miracle, but as an easy opportunity, not just for the calf, but for the territory that Kamunyak was now neglecting to defend properly. They moved in quickly, surrounding the pair. This was different from the hyenas or a lone male. This was a coordinated, lethal threat from her own kind. Kamunyak didn't roar. She crouched, her body tensing, her focus absolute. She positioned her body so that the frail calf was completely shielded by her flank, presenting the lionesses with an impenetrable, defiant wall of muscle. The lionesses hissed, confused by her reluctance to join them, or, failing that, to abandon the tiny prey. They were ready for a fight, a bloody assertion of the natural order. Kamunyak, however, delivered something entirely different. She let out a series of low, deep, guttural moans, sounds that were not warnings, but desperate, pleading articulations of maternal protection. The sounds held a power far beyond a simple threat. They conveyed a raw, heartbreaking unwillingness to concede this life. It was a language of deep, sacrificial love that somehow, momentarily, stalled the attack. The lead lioness approached, sniffing the air, then Kamunyak's face. The moment stretched, taut and silent, a high-wire act between life and death, instinct and empathy. The lead lioness finally, slowly turned her head away, confusion etched on her features. Her pride mates followed, baffled by the emotional force that had just deflected them. Kamunyak's choice, her self-sacrifice, had become so profound, it registered even on the cold calculus of her own species, proving that love could, in a rare, shining instance, be stronger than the need to feed. The story of Kamunyak is not about a lioness who was broken, but about one who was whole, a lioness whose maternal heart simply beat louder than her predatory instinct. Her 6 adoptions, spanning nearly 2 years, were a profound, unsettling challenge to every textbook on animal behavior. She did not raise a pride, she nurtured the very life she was supposed to extinguish, making her life a perpetual sacrifice and her existence a beacon. The calves were always destined to rejoin their own kind or succumb to the vast, indifferent wilderness, but the lesson Kamunyak taught endures. Her legacy is not measured in the survival rate of the oryx calves, which was, by the harsh mathematics of the wild, tragically low, but in the sheer, undeniable existence of her choice. She proved that the fundamental drives of nature are not always reducible to simple equations of survival and consumption. There is, even in the heart of an apex predator, a space for inexplicable, unconditional love. When we look out across the vast, empty plains of the Samburu today, we aren't just seeing predator and prey. We are looking at the landscape where Kamunyak, the Blessed One, redefined what it meant to be a mother. Her life was a brief, blazing testament to the power of nurture over nature, a reminder that the deepest connection can form in the most unlikely of spaces, crossing the sharpest, most fundamental divisions. Her story resonates not just in Kenya, but in every corner of the world where people struggle to reconcile conflict and difference. It is the ultimate narrative of empathy, a true life fable whispered in the dry grasses, a quiet, powerful testament to the force of a single, extraordinary heart that chose to protect rather than consume. Her choice changed nothing about the food chain, but everything about what we understand to be possible within the wild heart. The dust of the Samburu has long since settled over the tracks of the final oryx calf she guarded, and Kamunyak herself is part of the silence of the land. But the echo of her impossible guardianship remains, a soft, persistent whisper that suggests the truest, most enduring laws of the universe are not those of teeth and claw, but those woven from the sheer, bewildering power of compassionate connection. She was the anomaly that proved the rule, that sometimes the heart's fierce desire to protect transcends all biological mandates, leaving behind a legacy of profound interspecies grace. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to light. We have a question for you. What was the single moment in this story that resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.